Welcome back. Now let's get to the latest in the federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial against Sean Diddy Combs. Testimony resumed this morning from a former assistant using the pseudonym Mia. This is her second day of testimony where Mia said Combs physically and sexually assaulted her numerous times when she worked for him. Mia says that she also felt trapped with no safe way to report the abuse she suffered. The former assistant testified she was suspended several times from her job for different reasons, including accidentally falling asleep after being awake for days and reacting to one of Combs' violent episodes. The jury saw an email Mia received from Human Resources following the incident that noted she was suspended without pay for 5 days. Mia testified she was told her suspension was because Combs said she was being insubordinate. Combs has pleaded not guilty to charges that include racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking. If convicted on all counts, he could face up to life in prison. Joining me now to discuss this and other elements of the trial this week is Ryan Smith, contributor to the show, legal analyst extraordinaire for ABC, SportsCenter anchor as well. Welcome back to the show, Ryan. How are you, man? How's everything?
Good to see you, Stephen A. How you doing, man?
Oh, man, this case is crazy, man. I'm doing well, but I'm doing a hell of a lot better than Diddy. Let's get that out the way. Definitely a hell of a lot better than him. I want to pick up from where I just left off. What's the significance of Mia's testimony this morning?
It's huge, not only from the perspective that she talks about how she was sexually assaulted by Diddy, which is a big part of the prosecution's case, but it's also part of the racketeering case. Part of what they're trying to prove is a forced labor element of his racketeering case, essentially saying he had people like Mia working for days in a row under force of threats or coercion. What threats? There's threats that she has over text message of communications where he's saying, I'm going to tell everything. Things like sexual assault that she experienced in her mind that might be told to Cassie and others that might hurt her. So what they're trying to put together through Mia's testimony is a couple of different things. First is that there was an element of forced labor going on under Diddy, where people felt like they had to do things that were extreme under force of like threat or violence. She talks about how he threw a computer at her, threw spaghetti at her. That concern led her to be in this forced labor situation. She's also there to corroborate elements of Cassie's story. Cassie talking about the sexual assault she went through, and now Mia talking about what she experienced as part of the overall case of Diddy having this criminal enterprise, having all these people working for him, planning certain things, doing certain things to cover up the crimes they believe he was committing.
So what else stood out to you in court this week? I mean, that seems like more than enough. Was there anything else that stood out to you over the last few days?
Eppicorn Clark's testimony, that was huge. I mean, this woman talking about everything she went through working for him, working with him, that contributed to the elements of kidnapping and arson. Because you talk about Kid Cudi, that whole situation. We talked about this last week, Stephen A. The idea that Kid Cudi feels that he tried to bomb his Porsche. That's the arson part. So she's talking about all the different relationships that Cassie had with Kid Cudi, how Diddy found out, and the reactions he had. Coming to her house with a gun, forcing her to go one place. That's part of the forced coercion and all of this. And then doing these things like breaking into Kid Cudi's house. She talks about everything that happened there, and that she's then assigned to go and tell him not to talk to the police. All of this works into this criminal enterprise they're starting to talk about here. This idea that he owned or operated and associated this enterprise of doing crimes and had all these people doing things to help facilitate that. When we talked last week, we talked about, hey, where is all of this going? Now we're starting to see, Stephen A., where all this is going. It's not just about the accusations of sexual assault, the accusations of being a bad boss, the accusations of doing things, of threatening violence. It's the fact for prosecutors that he is doing all of these things to sort of facilitate criminal activity, and then on the other end, involving all these people to do these things for him, to either conceal it or to keep it going, and then doing it under force of threats or coercion, saying to people like Mia, hey, you do, or the insinuation is, hey, you don't do this for me, I'm gonna tell everything about what happened with you and me. You do telling somebody else, you don't come with me, I've got a gun, you got to come with me, even if you don't want to. This is the prosecution starting to lay out that most powerful case on racketeering. That's what they need to get the maximum time in jail.
And it's interesting that you bring that up because obviously when we've had you on covering this for us, and we really, really appreciate it. You made a point to say, basically, be patient, just wait. They're just starting to make their case. You know, when you're talking about him and his behavior, domestic violence, that's not sex trafficking, that's not racketeering. They're laying the groundwork for their case. You kept emphasizing that. Right now, how are you feeling about what the government is doing and how they're doing in presenting this case against Diddy? What kind of a grade would you give them right now?
I'd give them B plus to A minus, maybe even A. And here's why. They have their ducks in a row and they have their information set. And their witnesses, from what we're seeing in court, are testifying very, very well. What do I mean by that? Well, the groundwork part of it, like you talk about, when we first started talking about this, you asked me how long this case would last. I said 6 to 8 weeks. Now they're even saying it could go 5 weeks. So this case is picking up steam. The prosecution is not only efficiently presenting their case, because Stephen, you got to think about this as like people are sitting in that courtroom every day for hours hearing this stuff. If it drags on and on and on and prosecution can't be very efficient with their points, you start losing jurors. They're going fast, they're going smoothly, and they're getting out information very quickly and very precisely. That's helpful for the jury. Not only that, cross-examination becomes huge here because these people are getting pressed
Right.
back. Let's say, for example, me and Capricorn.
That's where
they're
I was
getting
going.
yeah, they're getting pressed back on their social media posts. All these things they posted with Diddy. These witnesses are prepared, though. They're talking about, hey, I posted this on this day, yes, but it didn't mean I didn't feel this way at the time. They're talking about with Capricorn Clark. They tried to press her on the fact of, did he have a gun? Yes, he had a gun. I had to go with him because he had a gun. That's witness preparation right there. You don't want that witness getting up there hemming and hawing, opening up other lines of questioning. Now, the defense is doing what they can do, but what the speed of this case and the witness testimony I'm reading is showing me are prosecuting witnesses that are very well prepared and a prosecution team that is slowly and methodically, but efficiently building that case for RICO. It's not an easy thing to do. And from what I'm seeing so far, reading, because we're not able to see it on TV, what I'm reading so far, they seem to be doing a very good job.
Well, we're just reading. You're not just reading. You're in the legal profession. You got sources all over the place. I know you. Listen to Ryan Smith. I mean, how is the? Hey, tell us how the legal profession feels the defense is doing in light of how good the prosecution looks right now. What are you hearing about what the legal system? I'm talking about your colleagues, your contemporaries, lawyers. What do they feel about how the defense is doing?
Hey, lawyers I know and people I talk to, they think the defense had an uphill case to begin with. I mean, this is a very tough case to beat. Stephen, you and I have talked about this before. This prosecution office, one of the best in the world. I mean, this is top notch, best lawyers you can get. That's number one. So you're fighting a really good lawyer on the other side. The second thing is, Diddy has a lot of bad facts against him. He's got lots of people coming forward talking about sexual assault and abuse. He's got a lot of people talking about the systems, how things ran, how he used threats and coercion to get them to do certain things. This is the RICO case. So they've got so much going against them. How are they doing? From people I talk to, the defense is doing well because you play the hand that you have. That's the key with defense. I think sometimes people think, well, defense lawyers are going to come out and have this smoking gun that nobody saw coming. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen because there's so many bad facts.
I apologize. I didn't mean to ask how the lawyers, your contemporaries, feel the defense is doing in terms of, are they doing a good job or are they not? I meant to ask, are they confident they're going to be able to get this man off? That's what I'm asking, to win this case. Because you can have lawyers, hold on. You can have lawyers saying, I think they're doing good based on the hand they're dealt. They're doing an excellent job. I'm asking, are their chances improving or dissipating towards getting them off?
You're asking me what I think, or you're asking what they would tell you if they were being honest?
I'm asking you and your contemporaries, what do y'all peel from what y'all have read, what y'all have heard? What's the scuttlebutt in your profession about how it's looking for Diddy?
Getting worse and worse by the day. Getting worse and worse by the day. And every bit of testimony I hear, it's getting harder and harder for him to get off. I think his chances are well below 50% of beating these charges. And you and I talked about this last week. Perhaps there is a way this jury looks at this, doesn't believe certain witnesses, and does what we call a compromise verdict. We're going to convict on some things that are lesser charges and maybe not on racketeering. That's perhaps something that might happen here. But I got to tell you, Stephen A., what I'm seeing here is this racketeering case being built very well. That's the main part of this case. When you have witnesses coming up and talking about he did this violence, he did that violence, we expected that. What I think is really interesting to me is how these witnesses are testifying that he would use that. I'm going to say this about you if you don't do this. I brought a gun. You're coming with me. You're going to do this with Kid Cudi. You're then going to talk to him and tell him not to talk to police. This is exactly what people say happens in RICO cases. And you got a jury who might be looking at it like, well, RICO cases, I think of mob cases. I think people have to understand, what do you think happens in those cases? It's a mob boss allegedly telling somebody else to do this, do that. I'm not getting my hands dirty. You're going to do all these things and I'm directing. And Stephen A., there's another part of this that I think might resonate with this jury that I think we have to keep our eye on. These are women, in particular, young women, coming forward talking about the forced labor, the violence perpetrated on them, the ways in which they were forced to do things at gunpoint, if you believe Capricorn Clark, if you talk about what Capricorn Clark talked about, the things that he would say about them. Will jurors look at this and say, he's treating women like this? I mean, when we think about a mob case, we think different men trying to prove things to other men. I wonder if there will be a dynamic of this, of these young women, in Mia's case, somebody in their 20s trying to work in the music business and all of a sudden realizing they're in these situations.
Ryan, I appeared on Law and Order recently. You know, I got killed. I got killed in the first 5 minutes. You know, but it was on my bucket list because I'm a Law and Order fanatic. I always watch the show, right? And we often see the defense coming to the prosecution looking to make a deal. Okay. And sometimes the prosecution accepts it because obviously you represent the state and, the quicker the case ends, the less money you have to spend, et cetera, et cetera. In real life, in the real world, what if Diddy's defense came and went to the prosecution and saying it's not looking pretty good for us, but you know what, we like to plead to a lesser charge. This prosecution, the Southern District of New York, they strike me as a bunch, they're going for blood. They want this, man. They ain't trying to settle. They don't want a settlement. That's what I'm getting from this. To that you say what?
That ship has sailed. That deal ship, I think, has sailed. Now look, Stephen A., I'm not a part of their office, so I can't say if somebody there might say, hey, here's what we don't know. We're in week 2, week 3 of this case. If something goes really wrong for the prosecution that's unexpected, that might change this dynamic. But if it keeps going the way it's going, I would say that ship sailed. That ship probably sailed not long after the raid, or not maybe a couple months after they started whispering things of charges. Because for him, the more he has been defiant, the more you put a prosecution in a place of, well, he's been saying for months, these are all lies. This isn't true. I didn't assault anybody. I didn't do any of this. And now the prosecution has to deal not only with their case, but the fact that in the public opinion, this case has taken on huge attention. And you don't want to be perceived as, I'm letting him off the hook, especially if you have a strong case. So in my opinion, that ship has sailed unless there is something that we don't know or something unexpected happens for the prosecution.
I kind of agree with you because I believe even if they don't do an exemplary job of proving sex trafficking and racketeering, I think they've made such a case for depicting him as a monster that you're going to have jurors that say, no, his ass going to jail. The hell with it. I'm going to say he's guilty for this too. I mean, I really feel like it can get that bad. But let me move on to this next question because I know you got to get you out of here. Suge Knight called in the CNN last night and said Combs should take the stand in his own defense. Combs actually did back in 2001, if you remember, when he testified in the Manhattan nightclub shooting that sent rapper Shine to prison for 10 years. Combs was acquitted of all charges in that case, by the way. We've got to mention that. But Ryan Smith, is it possible that he'll end up taking the stand in this trial? And should he? Would you advise him to do so?
No, not at all. And I don't want to get on the wrong side of Suge now. That's number one.
Right.
But look.
No, neither do we. Neither do we.
But I'll tell you what, that is a last resort of last resorts. I know that people watch Law. Look, Stephen A., I'm a Law and Order fan too. I know people watch shows like that. They see people take the stand. Sometimes they see people, jurors' minds being changed. Something comes out. Oh my God, I can't believe it. That is a rarity. This is something you do not want. The moment he takes the stand and opens his mouth, everything about his life is fair game, including stuff that they could not bring into court. Now he's opening his mouth. Let's ask him about those things that wouldn't have been admissible because he opened his mouth on them. Once he opens the door on some of that stuff, things that he might not even be thinking about, ways in which he might want to defend himself, that his lawyers tell him not to say, but maybe he could say because anything can happen on that stand. Now you're dipping yourself into an even deeper hole. So for me, that I do not think he should do it. I would never advise it. And honestly, even if everything was against him, I would still say no, because once you open that door, that could change everything about what you as a defendant think, or what
Oh,
you as a person who's on trial thinks could happen to you. And I think it's
Ryan.
easy for people to think about it outside of that, like I'm gonna prove myself, but that is not how
Yeah.
it plays out in a courtroom.
Maybe I'm just maybe I'm thinking a little bit differently because I got to open my mouth for a living. I mean, you host, I commentate, and so I'm thinking about, oh my God, people accusing it. I got to sit here and listen to all of these people talk, and I can't say anything in my
But Stephen
defense.
A,
That's
I
a
see
hard
you.
one, Ryan.
But Stephen A, I see you get cross-examined, but now let's imagine you getting cross-examined on your own words for days in a row, and not only that, on things that might have
Right,
flowed from those words that you didn't even bring up.
right.
That's the problem with
Yeah,
cross-examination. You open a door, and
yeah.
that door can be so much
Wow.
wider than you think.
Let me throw this by you. I don't know if you've seen the reports percolating right now, my man.
Yeah.
They're talking about how President Donald Trump, has not closed the door on pardoning P. Diddy for this sex trafficking and racketeering case. I mean, what do you make of that, Ryan? I mean, and how do you anticipate something like that could potentially influence the prosecution?
I don't even know what to say to that. I
Yeah.
Okay. So first thing is, if Diddy's convicted, he can do it. President Trump can do it. That's number one. Number two, I wouldn't, as a prosecutor, I would not let that affect me in any way. Here's the deal. My job is to prosecute the case. That's it. My job is to prosecute the case. If the president chooses to do something else, then he chooses to do something else. Now, some people might be out there thinking, okay, if the prosecution hears this, maybe that makes them want to make a deal. That is not how I would approach it if I was a prosecutor. I would say I can't control those things. What I can control is the case I prosecute. And also, what I can control is what my office does. And what my office does is we brought this RICO case and we brought this sex trafficking case and this assault case because we believe that we could win it. So we're going to pursue that. If something happens in the courtroom to change that and we need to make a deal, fine. But I wouldn't do that on the basis of what someone outside of the case says. Because to me, that's where you start second guessing yourself and you erode your case once you start doing that. So if I'm prosecutors, that's noise. My case is my case inside the courtroom, and that's what I focus on.
Any idea how you think that would influence the defense, or dare I say, a jury, if they somehow, some way became aware that the president is just lurking, being quoted as saying, "Diddy once liked me a lot." I mean, we got along just fine. I mean, could you imagine it having any kind of impact on a jury or the defense and its approach, knowing there's a possibility maybe that's an angle they could work in the months to come?
I don't think it would have much of an impact on the defense, other than they too have to kind of go with what's in that courtroom. They're bound by in that courtroom. The judge is what matters. The jury is what matters. Outside actors do not matter. So for them, they got to focus on that. Now, could they use that later if Diddy is convicted? They're trying to appeal. If there's rumblings about that, maybe that's a different discussion. But what I really worry about, Stephen A, is what you just said. A juror somehow finding out about this. I just want to say this as a person who's practiced law for decades. The courts are just, we don't realize how precious this institution is. We don't realize how amazing it is that we live in a society where people can be on trial and jurors can sit there and they can actually not read anything, see anything, and take the process so seriously that nothing outside affects them. It makes me sad that someone on the outside would say something, maybe you're not realizing how that could taint somebody and possibly taint this process. Because I got to say, Stephen A, and this is not me just saying this is the greatest process in the world. And I know a lot of people feel like
Hmm.
courts go against us, go against Black folks. I understand that part of it. I'm just saying, like, the integrity of the court system is so vital to making these cases in any way fair. And if we start having people say things on the outside that could perhaps get to a juror, man, that's disappointing, because that's a slippery slope we don't want to go down.